your writings on Nirmal Verma and from his fictions as well, he comes across, at least there is this sense that he's a person who always separated certain parts of his life and internal thoughts, and he found some peace and solitude in that process. Would you consider this as a generalization or an extrapolation based on from his fictions, or is it something which also is it something which was reflected from his writings, and it was justified that he also lived a life accordingly?
See, as a person, he was a very gregarious person. Most of his friends remember his laughter. He was a very social person, very involved person. In the routine I observed him to take, to follow. At 6:30 in the morning he would wake up. He would be at his study table till 1 o'clock with a short break around 11. That's the time when he's not uttering a single word. So he is in his solitude. Then we are having coffee together, 1 o'clock we are having lunch, then we go back to our rooms. 3:30 or so he would respond to his readers. Then he would personally go to post letters to readers, come back after taking a walk. Around 6:30, 7, one friend or two friends would always drop by. Mostly our neighbors or whoever. There were very few evenings when we were by ourselves, and when we were by ourselves, then we would be watching a movie on DVD. So all the evenings were either with friends at home, or sometimes we would go to a theatre, to some embassy reception. And I think this gives a clue to how his mind was living his vocation. Only solitude cannot inform your writing. Solitude has to be based on some real life thing where you reflect on something. So I think as a person he was living two things at the same time, half a day of no words, no spoken words, and another half a day of interacting with other people. And by the time I met him, he had a failed marriage behind him. His 10 years of living in Europe behind him. There was our age gap. So obviously, he now when I see myself in that age, this is a natural process that you are not living the moment. You are reflecting on what you were doing at that time, whether you could have made the best of it. So solitude would follow only if you have lived a very full life. If you haven't lived a full life, there would be no space for solitude. There will be just emptiness. What will you reflect on? Even as a child, his brother, his sisters remembered him as a very naughty child, but very quiet child. think his temperamental quietness must be because of how he was observing things.
Which gets reflected in
when you
his.
get into that physical act of speaking, speech actually breaks your relationship with reality. This is my understanding of spoken word, that the moment you enter into speech, your relationship with reality breaks. We think that speech will break our thought process. No. Speech breaks everything actually. It breaks your relationship with reality, it breaks your relationship with whatever is going in your mind. He was a man of few words, but then he was also a man who would get into very hot conversations with his friends, very aggressive conversations with his friends, big disagreements, ideological differences, how they had lived their lives, how he had lived his life, the compromises they had made, the life that should not have been lived like that. All great friendships, all great friendships have that space where you have this space for disagreement, for fights. He had that thing. He continued to have it till the end. तो वो जो बीच बहस में उनकी कहानी वो तो it's between father and his son. But I think that kind of questioning was always there. कोई भी रिलेशनशिप ऐसा नहीं है कि उसमें हमने बहस नहीं की तो it will still be a wholesome relationship. ऐसा नहीं होता. Quietness doesn't build up a relationship. It's those words which shape a relationship. तो एक हिस्से में it's like inner and outer. कि एक हिस्से में निर्मल की सब कहानियों में, and I remember this story. क्या एक दिन का मेहमान. Now you know in that story something has gone wrong
in the family.
Between
The
the couple,
husband and
they have broken apart. You can also guess that probably it had to do with another affair. The woman feels let down that there was another woman. और वो बड़ा aggressively पूछती है कि क्या तुम अब उसके साथ नहीं रहते? ये एक आता है. But nowhere does he, and this happens in, I think, all through his writing this happens. He touches the moment of pain, moment of betrayal, moment of letting down, but like a very capable writer, he never gives you the details. वहाँ पर वो ambivalence बना जाते हैं.
That brings out the raw emotions, that ambivalence.
So he would go around the wound, but he would not enter the wound. उस चीज को वो untouched छोड़ देते. Untouched भी, unresolved भी, क्योंकि शायद literature is not about resolution. Literature is about reflection. Literature is about it's not about finding peace. I don't know what literature is about. I can only say what it is not about. तो कोई सिंपलिस्टिक जवाब नहीं मिलते कि ये ना होता तो क्या हुआ होता. He must have been lonesome in Europe. पर हमें ये याद रखना चाहिए कि after all he was the first generation of post-colonial young people who had seen the British and the whites in a certain receiving end, not as equals. So this fact also must have affected how he carried himself in Europe. It's not that the others were making him conscious that he was an Indian and he was in Europe. It is also that because this is how he had grown up with the whites
in Shimla
back home, that there must have been this very invisible line between. I don't think now our generation or your generation, despite the difference in skin color, we would feel that kind of alienation. Part of it is also that we can go and come back very easily, very quickly. If you look at that time frame, it was so difficult to go there.
and expensive.
ये ships में आप जा रहे हैं, एक महीना ships में फिर आ रहे हैं. It was so expensive to travel. So once you went there, you really wanted to make the best of it. फिर वापस आने के लिए फिर से मेहनत करना, पैसे जमा करना. अभी तो no, I heard unless it's those workers जो हमारे ग्रीक आइलैंड्स में पाए जाते हैं, जो स्मगल होकर जाते हैं, unless it is that strata of society, people are freely moving around and going and coming back. So we don't go through that kind of reflective relationship with Europe. We look at Europe more like equals, I feel, and whatever my relationship has been with the West, with America, with Europe, we are better grounded in our own selves. Firstly, because we are children of an independent nation, and the fact that we are products of independent nation makes us really independent in the true sense of the word.
But in some of his critical essays, he's also mentioned how it bothered him that the way colonialism brought certain ideas and imposed them on us, which we still are affected by post-independence, and so that kind of a confusion or crisis or tension is there in our subjectivity, and he goes to Europe with that kind of a consciousness. He sees Europeans there, he sees they are also rebuilding their lives after the Holocaust and the Second World War. But so at least for me, I also read him as someone who's making an attempt to understand their subjectivity, their trauma, but also realizing that beyond a point the Indian or the post-colonial subject cannot understand, maybe find some kind of an equivalence, let's say Holocaust and partition violence, but more or less there is that sympathy, but there is a limit to how much they can understand, and that might be a cause of distancing or alienation or whatever others other synonyms you want to use. But do you feel that is the case with him, that when he's lived in Europe for so long, he also must have experienced that?
I think, I mean, I don't know how and why he responded in a certain way, but I try to understand. If you come from a place like India, where that kind of programmed violence is unheard of. You know, our society has also had its violent moments. You know, these caste issues, inequality issues, and part of his personality gets reflected when for 2-3 years he was a member of Communist Party. Like all young students, he was also a member of Communist Party. So, because he didn't understand, he was aware of how a subtle violence operates in our societies, Oriental societies. He couldn't have understood this very focused,
Mechanized industrial violence.
Almost psychopathic violence. You know? Despite our issues with different religions now in India, can we think of pogroms? I mean, you see some hints here and there. As a survivor of 1984, I know it happened for 3 days, and it scarred me, it scarred our family. But still, can we imagine our country, our society, going on and on with it for 5 years?
Yes.
This society is incapable of unleashing that kind of violence. So that must, that's how I would understand it. I would not, none of us would understand that kind of violence. Nirmal did, I mean, it will be interesting to see how as a young man, when he was working around Daryaganj, Chandni Chowk, along with his painter friend Jagdish Swaminathan, they were rescuing Muslim people, and it appears in, I think, his diary or some interview, that one of the houses in Daryaganj they went to, they saw the corpse of a young woman with bangles in her arm. The rest of the corpse was all rotten. And they, as part of the young student group, they were cleaning up the places. They were removing the corpse. Now, if we have, one part is that we have seen this kind of remnants of mass violence that takes place, hysterical violence, and then you see the systemic violence. The systemic violence of Holocaust didn't involve masses. It only involved officials, machinery, ideology. So I wonder if that was the challenge, that one could understand the mass hysteria, that moment of madness, but one could not understand the cold, calculative, sinister mind which would think of eliminating a whole race.
And then also the difficulty of making sense of like, how did we let this happen, and being part of that,
Yeah.
being in that environment and in that society where everyone is somewhat struggling to make sense of how did we let something like this happen. I'm assuming that I mean that must have been a
Yeah.
because now it's been what, 2-3 generations have passed. So even though the memory is there in terms of museums and certain recordings, like when he went there, it would have been people who just experienced this 5-6 years ago. So yeah, I mean in Vedin, I think the German tourist, she also in one scene she breaks down explaining how her husband was in the concentration camp, and the Indian protagonist.
And then this story, तीन एकांत में कौन सी कहानी, 1.5 इंच ऊपर, where this woman is working for resistance and she's picked up and she's made to disappear, and the husband only sees her picture among many pictures of people who have been shot. And the husband talks about it, that it's good that she didn't tell me her secret, because who knows, if I had known, I wouldn't have broken down and betrayed her. Actually इससे भी निर्मल के माइंड का क्लू मिलता, because as a writer he is in both places. जब हम पर्सन को राइटर में अगर अंडरस्टैंड करने की कोशिश करें, तो he is the person who will not share the secret with the closest person, because it's his secret. And on the other hand, he is also the person who is trying to understand कि सीक्रेट शेयर किया होता वो ठीक था या नहीं किया था वो ठीक था. Although I would say when I came to share my life with him, by that time he was sharing everything. If I were to talk about the writer as my husband, I can say that he shared things. What he didn't share was how he was processing them. He would talk about things which are disturbing to him, but how his mind would process, how he's going to write about them, that obviously nobody can foretell this is how the next sentence is going to come.
Some people have seen his writing as something which has not gone through significant changes since 1959. So others have said that perhaps it stagnated, or that writing should not be seen as a progression. Art should not be seen as a progression where things necessarily improve with time. would you, in your opinion, do you see any changes in his writing from his early to his late works, or also as a writer who is obviously taking a lot from personal experience, do you see any changes in his sensibility also from his early writings to his late writings?
No, I think his sensibility remained constantly evolving in a certain way. The way I understand Nirmal's writings is that his stakes were in trying to understand the core of human experience, core of tradition, core of ideas we live by. He did experiment with craft, like Lalkin ki Chhat. But he was much more than craft. I think the theme dictated how he wanted to see. As a younger reader of his works, I too would feel that he is not dazzling us with a different way of telling things. But now, because I have to I've been proofreading him for a good 20 years, I can see that it's just a minor issue. The style, the craft is not writing is about something very different. And if he remains relevant to most of us, it is because he was grappling with something much deeper, much more important than this thing. He may not have dazzled us, but at the same time, at least to me, his writing doesn't feel dated. It would be a very empty exercise if it was engaging me at the level of craft, but not.
The craft didn't come at the cost of certain content or questions that he wanted to raise.
And I think he was a very visual writer. His style, his craft was more based on visual observations than on linguistic expressions. वो अंतिमरण्य में ही आता है, बल्कि उसको देखकर मुझे ये पाथेर पांचाली का सीन याद है कि ये जो नरेटर है, he watches मेरा साहब कि आगे आगे मेरा साहब जा रहे हैं, उनके पीछे पीछे कोई और जा रहा है, सबसे पीछे पीछे कुत्ता जा रहा है. I think this is, if I remember it right, this is the opening paragraph. It's very, very visual. If we read writers like Coetzee or Toni Morrison, they would not be describing the same thing like this. It would be more, their essence would be more in how they construct a sentence, how they repeat something. But in a writer like Nirmal, the surprise element is in how he describes the situation.
Using certain imagery, certain fragments.
वो एक जगह जहाँ मेरा साहब को अटैक हुआ है पैरालिसिस का, वो जो दृश्य है, no, all the essence of that situation is in what is visually happening in that moment to Maharaja. कि उनके मुंह से गूं की आवाज़ निकले. No, this is just a description of somebody watching him in that situation कि वो कुछ कहना चाह रहे लेकिन कह नहीं पा रहे. वो सिचुएशन ही अपने आप में इतनी अर्जेंट है, इतनी जेन्युइन है कि उसको किसी और तरीके से भाषा नहीं पकड़ सकती. वो सिचुएशन ही भाषा बन गई. And this happens so many different times that the situation, the description becomes the text.
He also mentions in some of the interviews that the way he constructs his stories is also that he has just certain images or certain people in mind. He doesn't try to build a coherent plot. That he has certain ideas and images in mind, and on the basis of that, then certain things he remembers from somewhere, certain small incidences, and he builds on that. So, in that sense, I guess the images are always at the forefront of what he's trying to articulate.
Like the story Parinde, it's a well-known fact. He has talked about it in many interviews. It began with his hearing a laughter.
In a hostel, outside the hostel.
I don't know साहित्य में कितनी बार होता होगा कि सैर करते हुए आप किसी बिल्डिंग के पास से गुजरें और अंदर से हंसी की आवाज़ सुनाई दे, and story emerges.
He was someone who was deeply invested in the notion of tradition as something which is not necessarily religious, but tradition redefined in a more secular manner. And he talked about this weak thread which is still connecting modern subjects with their tradition. He tried to explore that. What was this tradition for him? And I mean, it's a very difficult question to answer, but what was this tradition for him, and how did he try to, in some sense, connect this tradition in his personal life also? Because in his writings he makes it clear, perhaps in his fictions also he tries to show what happens when that kind of an anchor is missing from your life, where you feel alienated. But in his own personal life, did he face some struggles to make sense of his life, or to continue being part of a larger shared knowledge or tradition?
Well, he was definitely not a practitioner of any kind. So, if you can call that a secular person, I don't know. Because he definitely didn't do any rituals, he did not practice anything. But because the rituals take place in all families, in all household situations, he was a great observant of what the meaning of those rituals is. And in his writings, I remembered some moments, like this one moment where his mother asked him to throw a coin in the river. तो दिस इज़ वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग कि कोई पूजा पाठ की चीज़ उन्होंने याद नहीं की, लेकिन ये याद की. अच्छा, जहाँ पूजा पाठ की चीज़ भी याद करते हैं, किसी और इंटरव्यू में उन्होंने कहा कि when they were children, और शिमला के घर में कोई साधु महात्मा आते थे और वो एक महीना उनके घर में रहते थे. But in that description also, he doesn't tell us what the sadhu would do there. कोई पूजा पाठ करते थे या क्या. He would describe ऐसा चोगा पहने होते थे या ऐसे नामा थे या the physical impressions कि ऐसी गंध थी उनकी, ऐसा वो उस तरह की चीज़ें. लेकिन मुझे लगता है कि जो व्यक्ति रामकृष्ण परमहंस को उतना ही ध्यान से पढ़ता रहा जितना ध्यान से पृष्ठ को पढ़ा होगा, या रमन महर्षि के conversations को. He would definitely be living a different kind of life in his mind. I wouldn't call it this area of interest or that area. लेकिन इससे ये तो पता चलता है कि हम अपने इंडियन होने को कितना फ्रेटरलेस तरीके से समझना चाहते हैं. Not in terms of Quran, not in terms of Vedas and Upanishads, but in terms of history of Indian mind. I think he was deeply grappling with this. When for him these were very live references. Sri Aurobindo and Raman Maharshi, Paramhans. It's sad that his critics either put him in one slot or the other.
Right.
Either he became a Hindu nationalist or he became an exile. But I think he was trying to understand in a different way.
Or explore the tensions also.
How the tradition, how our tradition posited us in the universe.